Hello class, this is Mr. Sutton, and today we're going to talk about Scale 20, which is solving linear equations and rearranging formulas. So first we are going to be solving two-step linear equations, and so this one we have 8 plus 2r equals negative 10, and we're going to solve for r. So when solving linear equations, we want to get the variable we're solving for by itself, in this case r. And this is called a two-step equation because you can solve it in 2 steps. You could possibly take more steps than that if you maybe make useless steps, but I'm going to show you the 2-step way to solve this. So if we want to get r by itself, we have this 2 multiplied by it, and outside of that we're adding the 8. So the first thing we want to get rid of is the 8. Since we're adding the 8, to get rid of it, we want to subtract the 8. And if we subtract the 8 on one side of the equation, we have to subtract the 8 on the other side of the equation as well. So 8 minus 8 is 0. So then we have 0 plus 2r, and we can just say 2r, equals negative 10 minus 8 is negative 18. So now we just have the 2 attached to the r, and it's attached by multiplication. If we have a number just directly in front of a variable, there's an implied multiplication there. So in order to get rid of multiply by 2, we would divide by 2. And if we divide by 2 on one side of the equation, we have to divide by 2 on the other side of the equation as well. 2 divided by 2 is just 1. So we could say 1r, which 1r is the same as just r, equals negative 18 divided by 2 is negative 9. So in this case, r equals negative 9. So make sure you have this example written in your notes. And some things to note, when we are solving equations, we're going to get the variable by itself by opposite operations. So the first thing we did when we tried to get r by itself, instead of adding 8, we subtracted 8 to both sides. And then to get rid of the 2, instead of multiplying by 2, we divided by 2 on both sides. So we did the opposite operations there to cancel those things out. And another thing to note is anything done to one side of the equation must be done to the other side as well. So when we subtracted 8, we subtracted it to both sides. We divided by 2, we divided on both sides. So make sure you write down this and also write down these notes. This is a 3-step linear equation. It's called a 3-step equation because it takes 3 steps to solve. You'll notice the difference between this one and the last one is that we have x's on both sides of the equation, unlike before where we just had it on one side. So that is the extra step where we have to get our x's on the same side of the equation. I'm going to do that first. You don't necessarily have to do that first. You could subtract the 3's first if you would prefer, but I'm going to go ahead and get my x's on the same side of the equation. Now there's 2 ways you can go about this. You could subtract 15x on both sides, or you could subtract 10x on both sides. And I usually do it such that I end with positive numbers. So if I subtracted 15x on both sides, 15x minus 15x gives me 0x, and then 10x minus 15x gives me a negative 5x. So then you're going to have to worry about that negative later. So I usually do it so that I have positive numbers left over. But if you're not worried about negatives, you don't have to do it that way. So 10x minus 10x gives me 0x. 15x minus 10x gives me positive 5x plus 3 equals plus 3 still. 0x would go here, but I don't have to write that. Now we can try to get x by itself. So now we just have this 5x plus 3. I'm going to get rid of the plus 3 first. So if I have plus 3, I'm going to subtract 3 on both sides. Subtract 3 on both sides. So then I'm left with 5x equals. And then over here on the right side, we had 3 and then we subtracted 3. So now we just have 0. And 5x left on the left side. So I want to get the x by itself. I have this 5 multiplied out in front. So in order to get rid of that, I'd have to divide by 5, divide by 5. 5 divided by 5 is just 1, so that leaves me with just x equals, and then 0 divided by 5 is 0. If you subtracted 15x on both sides, you should get the same thing. And let's see what happens. So I subtract 15x on both sides. I get that negative 5x like I talked about. And then we would have to subtract 3 on both sides like we did over here. And we get 0 equals negative 5x. And then we would divide by negative 5, which in this case, 0 divided by negative 5 is not that tricky. It's still 0. But in some instances where you have, like if I had negative 10 divided by negative 5, I think that's an area where some people might make a mistake there, where they'd say negative 10 divided by negative 5 is negative 2, when actually a negative divided by a negative is a positive. So dividing by a negative number can lead to some extra mistakes if you are not super careful. That's why I usually set it up such that I just have a positive x. But as long as you are being careful about dividing by negatives, then you should get the same correct answer. And we can see that this is a 3-step equation. First step was subtract 10, second step was subtract 10x, second step was subtract 3, and the third step was divide by 5. So those are the 3 steps. That's why it's called the 3-step equation. Next, I'm going to talk about rearranging formulas. So rearranging formulas, we apply a lot of the same ideas. We are solving for a specific variable, in this case b, and we do that by isolating that variable on one side of the equation. We do the opposite operations of the other things around it to move those to the other side of the equation. The difference is we have other variables here, like here we have d, we also have g, instead of just numbers. So that is the difference, but we can still solve it for b. We just have to leave it in terms of d and g because we don't know what those are. So let's go ahead and think about how to solve this. So we have d squared plus 4 times b equals g. So I want to get b on one side of the equation by itself. Right now it's being multiplied by this whole thing, d squared plus 4. And so this is just attached by multiplication. So since we're multiplying this whole thing together, we can just as easily divide that whole thing, d squared plus 4. That's not a 4. D squared plus 4. And if we do it on one side of the equation, we have to divide on both sides of the equation. D squared plus 4. So d squared plus 4 divided by d squared plus 4 is just 1. So we just have 1 times b on the left side of the equation. And on the right side of the equation, we have g divided by d squared plus 4. And since we don't know what g or d is, there's nothing else we can do here. This is as simplified as it can get, but we did rearrange this formula so that it's equal to b. Solve the following equation for b. Make sure to take into account whether a letter is capitalized or not. We don't have any of the same letters being capitalized or lowercase, so this would be our final answer for this. So make sure you have this example down in your notes as well. Here are some more rearranging formulas. The formula for volume of a cone is V equals 1/3 pi r squared h, where r is the radius of the cone, h is the height of the cone. Rewrite the formula to solve for h in terms of r and v. So this time we're solving for h. We want to get h by itself on one side of the equation, and we don't know what r and v are, so we can leave those just as variables on the other side of the equation. So I rewrote the equation over here. We have h is on the right side of the equation, so we want to get rid of everything else. We want to get rid of the 1/3, the pi, the r squared. on this right side, we want to move it to the other side. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of the 1/3. To get rid of 1/3, that's the same thing as dividing by 3. So to get rid of a division by 3, we would multiply both sides by 3. So 1/3 times 3 would just leave us with 1. So that's good. Those would cancel. And then on the left side of the equation, we have 3v. So we still have this pi r squared to get rid of. So now we just have h times r squared times pi. We can go ahead and divide those. Since those are all being multiplied together, we can divide pi r squared to the other side of the equation. So we're left with h on the right side and 3v over pi r squared on the left side. Even though we could plug in an approximation for pi or use our calculators, we don't want to do that. We just want to leave it in terms of pi as well. So we just want to leave this pi symbol in here. But we can rewrite it so h is on the left side, how we're more familiar with it. H equals 3v over pi r squared. So your final answer would be h equals 3v over pi r squared. Here we have another rearranging formulas. A formula to find the frequency f of a cyclic phenomena based on the period t is f equals 1 over t. Solve the formula for t in terms of f. So we have f equals 1 over t. If we want to solve this for t, right now t is in the bottom of this fraction over here. So there's nothing we can really do to keep it on the right side of the equation. If that's the case, it's not like I could get rid of this 1 over top somehow. And then, yeah, so what we would have to do is we would still have to multiply by t on both sides. So right now we have 1 divided by t. So we would have, in order to get the t out of the bottom of this fraction, we have to multiply by t on both sides of the equation. Which usually when we're solving for something, we leave it where it is and we don't move it to the other side of the equation. But in the case that it's on the bottom of a fraction, there's really nothing else we could do. We have to multiply on both sides so that we can get it out of there. So then the t's would cancel. 1 over t multiplied by t, those are reciprocals. So those would cancel and we'd be left with just 1. And then on the left side of the equation, now we have t multiplied by f, and then just a 1 on the right side of the equation. And so now what we could do is we can divide this f away. We don't want to divide the t away because then we're back where we started, so we want to divide the f to the other side of the equation. So we have t equals 1 divided by f. So now we have t by itself on one side of the equation, 1 over f on the other. So that's another thing you might want to write down. You should write down in your notes when the variable you are solving for is in the denominator, you must multiply it on both sides of the equation. So like in this case, t was in the denominator. There's no way we could solve for t as is with it in the denominator. What we have to do is we have to multiply t on both sides of the equation, get it out of the denominator so that we can solve for it. So make sure you have all these examples down as well as the extra notes for these. If you have any questions about this material, make sure you are asking for help in class. Make sure you are going to office hours. Have a good day.